So I want you to picture the west bank of the Rhine River.
Okay, setting the scene.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
The date is March 1945, and the air has that really deep, biting late winter dampness.
Ugh, the kind that just completely seeps right through those heavy wool uniforms.
Exactly. It just settles right into your bones.
Mhm.
Now imagine you are a German intelligence officer.
Oh, man. High-stress job right there.
Seriously. You're maybe part of the forward reconnaissance units, right? The Aufklärungstruppe.
Right, peering through the freezing mist.
Yeah, and you are actively observing what can only be described as a complete tactical nightmare assembling itself on the opposite bank.
A massive American armored division.
Yes, you are watching them massing directly across the river, clearly preparing for this massive amphibious assault.
And, the visual evidence they had at the time was just undeniable.
It wasn't just binoculars, right?
No, not at all. The Luftwaffe, their reconnaissance flights, they had managed to dart through all this Allied anti-aircraft fire.
Which was incredibly dangerous.
Extremely. But they returned with undeniable photographic proof.
Like hard evidence.
Exactly. You look at the wet emulsion of those aerial photographs, and it shows hundreds of American M4 Sherman tanks.
Hundreds of them. Just sitting there.
Yeah, meticulously staged right under the skeletal canopy of those winter trees.
Wow.
They're parked in strict doctrinal formation, just waiting for the order to advance.
But the sensory data doesn't even stop with the photographs, does it?
Oh, no. It gets so much worse.
Right, because as the sun dips below the horizon and this fog thickens, the situation actually escalates. The darkness doesn't bring silence.
Far from it. It brings this overwhelming mechanical roar.
Right, like all night long, your forward listening posts are picking up this relentless, ground-shaking rumble.
The sound of 2.5-ton trucks rolling into forward positions.
Yeah, you hear that unmistakable, heavy, metallic grind of tank treads chewing up the frozen mud.
The revving of massive diesel and gasoline engines.
Exactly. Yeah. It is the terrifying acoustic signature of this massive industrialized army shifting its weight forward, right? Getting ready to launch a full-scale river crossing.
And the electromagnetic spectrum is completely saturated, too.
The radio intercepts.
Yeah, German radio operators sitting in their intercept stations, they are pulling down this absolute torrential downpour of American radio traffic.
And it's not just static, right? They know what they're listening to.
Right, they aren't intercepting generic noise. They are actively mapping the specific, localized chatter of highly active American units.
Because they can identify the operators.
Exactly. They can identify the distinct command hierarchies because they recognize the idiosyncratic rhythms of the Morse code.
Like a biometric signature.
Yes, essentially the biometric signatures of the American operators. They know exactly which specific division is across that river.
That's wild.
They can even triangulate the headquarters, which is, practically vibrating with the frantic transmission of encrypted orders.
And then, to just totally complete this terrifying intelligence picture, you have the human element.
Right, the human intelligence networks.
Yeah, German sympathizers and spies sitting in local cafes miles behind the front lines, and they are actively eavesdropping on American soldiers.
Who are presumably being very loud.
Oh, loudly and with staggering carelessness, grumbling over their beers about their commanding generals, complaining about the terrible weather.
Dropping incredibly specific hints about an impending dawn attack, I bet.
Exactly. Every single intelligence vector, visual, acoustic, signals, and human Americans is pointing to the exact same catastrophic conclusion.
So, confronted with that completely overwhelming convergence of data, the German high command does the only tactically sound thing available to them.
Right, they react.
Yeah, they react to the focal point of the threat. They scramble their regional defenses, they violently redeploy their heavy artillery batteries away from other sectors.
Which weakens the rest of the line.
Exactly, and they mass their infantry forces to meet this overwhelming assault head-on. They literally commit their reserves to brace for the impact.
But here's the historical twist that completely rewrites our understanding of the European theater.
The big reveal.
None of it was real.
Not a single piece of it.
Not a single solitary piece. That massive armored division, the Germans were frantically reorienting their entire defensive line to fight. It was a phantom.
Total illusion.
Those hundreds of Sherman tanks visible from the air, they were meticulously painted, inflatable rubber decoys.
They were essentially giant weaponized balloons.
Yes, so incredibly light that a team of 4 men could simply lift a 30-ton tank over their heads and carry it into the woods.
Which is such a bizarre image if you think about it.
And that terrifying acoustic footprint. The roar of the engines that kept the German sentries awake.
Phonograph records.
Exactly. High-fidelity phonograph records. They were broadcasting pre-recorded audio of armored maneuvers through these massive 500-watt amplifiers mounted on the back of half-cracks.
And the frantic radio chatter?
Completely fabricated by a handful of operators playing a script.
The entire looming catastrophe of an American invasion was literally just a localized theatrical performance.
And the performers executing this masterpiece of deception were a top-secret unit of about 1,100 men. Not hardened infantrymen.
Nope. Not career West Point tacticians either.
No. They were artists, painters, sound engineers, architects, and set designers.
Just incredible.
And while the German war machine was violently shifting its massive weight to crush this phantom army, these artists were literally crawling through the mud.
Under live fire, no less.
Yes, occasionally under highly accurate, live German artillery fire, using rudimentary bicycle repair kits to frantically patch shrapnel holes in their deflating rubber tanks.
Also, the illusion wouldn't collapse.
It is wild. So, welcome to this deep dive. Today, our mission is to unpack a dense stack of declassified historical accounts, military after-action reports, and personal memoirs detailing the 23rd Headquarters Special Troops.
Better known to history as the Ghost Army.
Exactly. Our objective here is to dissect how a staggeringly small unit of 1,100 creative minds managed to weaponize pure illusion.
Utilizing rubber, wire recorders, and just pure theatricality to dismantle the situational awareness of the Nazi war machine.
We are going to examine the tactical mechanics of how they saved tens of thousands of Allied lives through sheer, unadulterated stagecraft.
And perhaps most astonishingly, how they maintained an absolute ironclad vow of silence about their operations for half a century.
Okay, let's unpack this.
You know, looking at the macro level of World War II, this narrative is just a massive departure from our conventional understanding of mid-century warfare.
How so?
While the historiography of the Second World War is almost entirely dominated by the concept of industrial might, right?
Sure, like the factories and production lines.
Exactly. We study the logistics of steel production, the massive output of the Willow Run bomber plant, the tonnage of the Liberty ships.
Just the sheer crushing arithmetic of deploying millions of troops.
Exactly. But the Ghost Army, they represent this highly localized pivot from kinetic industrial warfare to pure psychological warfare.
And the structural blueprint of this deception is totally fascinating, especially when we look at the unlikely personnel they tasked to execute it.
The artists.
Yeah. So the unit was officially activated on January 20th, 1944. And instead of being birthed in the sterile halls of the Pentagon, this grand theatrical production begins its conceptual life in the muddy, unglamorous woods of Camp Forest, Tennessee.
And the geographical isolation of Camp Forest is critical to the story here.
Right, because of secrecy.
Yeah. I mean, you have the greatest, most mechanized global conflict in human history raging across two oceans, and the genesis of this tactical phantom army is being hammered out in rural Tennessee.
Far away from the prying eyes of the enemy, obviously.
But also far away from the conventional American military brass.
True. Now, the doctrinal inspiration actually originated with the British.
Right. General Montgomery in North Africa.
Yes. During Operation Bertram, they used camouflage and dummy vehicles to deceive Rommel before the Second Battle of El Alamein.
But the American who really seized this concept expanded its scope exponentially and violently shoved it through the skeptical bureaucracy of the War Department.
Was Major Ralph Ingersoll.
Yes. And Ingersoll's background provides the entire ideological foundation for the unit.
Because he wasn't a normal officer.
He was an absolute anomaly in the officer corps. He wasn't a career military tactician steeped in the rigid doctrines of maneuver warfare. Before the war, he was a highly visible celebrity journalist.
Wait, really? Like a famous writer?
Yeah. He was the managing editor of Time magazine and later the publisher of the daily newspaper PM in New York.
Wow, so a media guy.
Entirely. His entire civilian career was built on understanding mass media, narrative construction, and crucially, how to manipulate the perception of a targeted audience.
So when he secured his commission and moved into military planning, he brought that publisher's mindset straight to the battlefield.
Exactly. He didn't see the German army merely as an enemy force to be destroyed with ballistics.
He viewed them as an audience to be deceived with a narrative.
That's spot on. And he was the driving force who protected this experimental unit from being cannibalized for replacement troops by traditionalist general.
And he had a pretty great nickname for them too, right?
Oh yeah, he had a very telling, affectionate nickname for the 23rd Headquarters Special Troops. He called them my con artists.
Which is just the perfect framing, because they were essentially executing a complex, multi-layered long con.
Absolutely. Only the stage was the European theater of operations.
And the penalty for a burned con was immediate artillery bombardment.
Right, the stakes could not be higher.
So the unit was ultimately placed under the command of Colonel Harry L. Reeder. And the most vital metric to grasp here is the sheer density of the unit relative to its strategic footprint.
Because they were tiny.
Microscopic. In the context of a war mobilizing millions, this unit consisted of precisely 82 officers and 1,023 enlisted men.
Roughly 1,100 men in total.
Yeah. But the specific recruiting methodology the military deployed to find those 1,100 men is what elevates this from a quirky footnote to a profound study in operational creativity.
Because they didn't go to regular boot camps.
No. When the War Department needed to staff a unit whose sole purpose was visual and acoustic deception, they bypassed the infantry training camps completely.
And opened recruiting pipelines directly into art schools.
Yes. The nation's premier art schools, architecture firms, and advertising agencies. They systematically drafted the American creative class.
And the rationale was deeply pragmatic, even if it completely horrified the traditionalist generals.
Oh, horrified is probably an understatement. I kept picturing the friction in those War Department briefings.
Oh, to be a fly on the wall.
Right. You have hardened combat generals, men who view warfare as this strict equation of localized superior firepower and logistical supply chains.
And you're telling them their secret weapon is a bunch of guys who usually argue about color theory and brushstrokes?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Imagine their reactions. Hey, a significant portion of your tactical deception strategy is being handed over to a battalion of men who, 6 months prior, were in Greenwich Village studios debating architectural modernism.
It's absurd on paper. But the roster reads like a future syllabus for a modern art history class.
It really does. They drafted Bill Blass, who would return from the war to become a monolithic titan of the American fashion industry.
They recruited Ellsworth Kelly.
Yes, one of the most defining figures of post-war abstract painting.
And they drafted Art Kane, who would go on to be a transformative star photographer for magazines like Esquire and Life.
So we are talking about taking a fiercely independent, highly opinionated senior art school thesis class, putting them in olive drab, and infusing their creative output with immediate life-or-death stakes on a global battlefield.
What's fascinating here is the underlying cognitive psychology that drove that unconventional recruitment strategy in the first place.
Okay, break that down for us. Why artists?
Well, the military intelligence apparatus realized that executing a convincing deception isn't about simply building a fake object.
It's deeper than that.
Much deeper. It's about hacking the observer's visual cortex. If you consider what a classically trained painter or a seasoned architect does for a living, their entire profession is predicated on manipulating human perception.
Like drawing the eye to a specific point.
Exactly. An architect understands spatial relationships and how massive structures sit within a landscape. A painter understands chiaroscuro, how shadow and light interact to create the illusion of massive weight, depth, and three-dimensionality on a completely flat, weightless surface.
Wow, yeah. And a fashion designer understands how to draw the eye to a specific focal point while deliberately distracting it from structural flaws elsewhere.
They are professionally trained to manufacture a convincing, immersive reality out of raw canvas and empty space.
And the military brass actually recognized that a standard-issue infantryman, no matter how brave or well-trained in rifle marksmanship, simply wouldn't understand the nuanced visual physics required for this.
Right. An infantryman doesn't know how to make a piece of canvas and rubber intuitively register as 5 tons of hardened steel from a reconnaissance plane flying at 3,000 feet.
Furthermore, the Allied High Command had developed a very specific psychological profile of their adversary. Right?
Yes. The German military intelligence apparatus and the Wehrmacht command structure as a whole was incredibly rigid.
They operated on strict doctrinal frameworks.
They expected warfare to follow the textbook. And the brilliant realization by planners like Ingersoll was that if you want to successfully deceive an enemy that thinks in highly structured, predictable algorithms.
You cannot use conventional military thinkers who operate on those same algorithms.
Exactly. You must introduce chaos. You need rule breakers, visual disruptors, and creative thinkers who can dynamically anticipate what a rigid German intelligence officer expects to see in a specific tactical scenario.
And then reverse engineer a perfectly crafted, bespoke illusion to feed that exact expectation.
They successfully weaponized the bohemian creative process.
Which is brilliant. But gathering 1,000 artists and architects in the woods of Tennessee and giving them a theoretical mandate is vastly different from operational execution.
Oh, absolutely. Theory versus practice.
Right. The leap from conceptual art to battlefield reality is where the mechanics of this deep dive become incredibly granular. Like, how do you actually take 1,000 guys with sketch pads and T-squares and project the terrifying three-dimensional illusion of tens of thousands of heavily armed troops into the middle of the European theater?
Well, that execution relied on the development of a highly compartmentalized, deeply specialized methodology.
Like a heist crew.
Very much like a heist crew. The 23rd Headquarters Special Troops wasn't just a monolith. It was structured more like a highly coordinated cinematic production company. They divided their operations into 4 distinct, interdependent disciplines of deception.
The 4 pillars of the con.
Exactly.
I love how the source materials break down these 4 pillars. It feels intensely specialized, where each operative brings a highly specific, irreplaceable technical skill to bypass a different layer of the vault's security.
So let's systematically dissect them.
Let's do it. We have to start with the foundational element. Visual deception.
This was the domain of the 93rd Engineer Camouflage Battalion.
The architects of the Rubber Army.
Yeah, and their primary toolkit consisted of over 600 inflatable pneumatic decoys.
And we aren't just talking about generic blobs. We're talking about full-scale, incredibly detailed inflatable M4 Sherman tanks, 2.5-ton logistical trucks, jeeps, heavy artillery pieces.
They even had dummy Piper Cub reconnaissance airplanes.
Like really fake airplanes, too.
Oh, yeah. And the engineering behind these inflatables is a crucial detail because these were not the rudimentary, flimsy novelties you might buy in a modern poo supply aisle.
Right, they had to withstand a war zone.
Exactly. They were meticulously engineered structures, primarily constructed from a framework of inflated rubber tubing wrapped in heavily painted, treated neoprene and canvas.
And from the perspective of a German reconnaissance pilot engaged in a high-speed, high-altitude flyover where they only have a fraction of a second to snap a photograph, these decoys were terrifyingly flawless.
Because the artist had calculated the exact dimensions, the turret angles, and most importantly, the shadow casting.
Oh, the shadows. I read about that.
Yeah, an inflatable tank painted perfectly, but casting the wrong shadow at 2:0 p.m. would instantly signal a fake to a trained photographic analyst.
So the visual team spent hours meticulously adjusting the placement of these balloons to ensure the shadows aligned perfectly with the surrounding terrain.
But the real tactical genius was the weight ratio.
Because they were balloons.
Exactly. On the ground, these massive, visually imposing machines were so astonishingly light that a handful of soldiers could easily pick up a Sherman tank, carry it across a field, and reposition it.
The operational agility that provided is just staggering. You could literally deflate an entire armored division, pack the compressed rubber into the cargo beds of a dozen real transport trucks,
Drive them 100 miles under the cover of darkness to a new sector.
fire up the air compressors, and inflate a massive, fresh armored threat by dawn.
If you contrast that with conventional military logistics, the advantage becomes incredibly clear.
Because moving a genuine armored division requires an immense logistical tail.
Oh, massive! It demands thousands of gallons of specialized fuel, massive railway transports, bridge reinforcements, weeks of planning, and it leaves an undeniable physical footprint on the environment.
Whereas the 93rd Camouflage Battalion could conjure that exact same strategic threat out of thin air, manipulate the enemy's defensive posture, and vanish before the enemy could verify the threat, all with the logistical footprint of a single convoy.
But you know, the visual team faced massive real-world friction too.
Right, the weather.
The weather was a constant, unpredictable enemy. An unexpected gale force wind could, and occasionally did, pick up a 30-ton visual threat and send it tumbling end over end across a French farm field.
Which would be hilarious if it wasn't so deadly.
Right. And furthermore, a massive tank doesn't just appear in a field, it leaves deep, destructive tracks in the mud.
Ah, right. Pristine mud around a parked tank is a dead giveaway.
Exactly. So they had to deploy a few real tanks, or specifically modified bulldozers, to deliberately chew up the terrain, painting the mud with tracks that logically led right up to the rear treads of the inflatable decoys.
It's that obsessive attention to the surrounding environmental context that really sold the visual illusion.
But an army of that magnitude isn't merely seen from the air.
No, it possesses a massive, unavoidable acoustic footprint. A silent armored division is an immediate red flag to forward listening posts.
Which birthed the second pillar of their toolkit, sonic deception.
This was the responsibility of the 3132 Signal Service Company. And the technical leaps they made here in the mid-1940s are just astounding.
They really are. The unit enlisted highly specialized sound engineers, many of whom had worked in the burgeoning radio and film industries.
And partnered them with acoustic scientists from Bell Laboratories.
Yes. They traveled to actual armored training grounds in the United States, like Fort Knox, and utilized state-of-the-art wire recorders to capture the highly specific, nuanced audio signatures of kinetic warfare.
Like, they recorded the distinct acoustic profiles of heavy infantry convoys slogging through deep mud.
The chaotic, metallic clamor of combat engineer battalions constructing steel pontoon bridges over rivers.
And just the ambient, generalized roar of tens of thousands of troops operating heavy machinery.
And they didn't simply project this audio through basic megaphones.
No, the playback mechanics were a massive engineering feat. They transferred these wire recordings onto massive, highly durable 16-inch transcription records.
They essentially built highly mobile, heavily armored sound systems. They mounted massive, custom-built 500-watt amplifiers and massive speaker arrays onto the back of M3 half-tracks.
And these arrays were so incredibly powerful that under the right atmospheric conditions, particularly at night, when temperature inversions can bounce sound waves back toward the ground, the audio could project a convincing illusion up to 15 miles away.
15 miles! It's just wild. But the true artistry wasn't just the volume, it was the live mixing.
Right. They were essentially operating a massive battlefield-scale mixing board.
Exactly. If the tactical narrative required the Germans to believe a column of tanks was advancing down a specific road from left to right, the sound engineers would dynamically fade the audio across a sequence series of half-tracks positioned along the line.
They were literally playing the multi-track soundtrack of a phantom battle to a captive audience of German acoustic sentries.
But the physical vulnerability of this system is terrifying when you consider the environment.
Because they're using vinyl records.
Oh, right. They were executing these complex acoustic maneuvers using highly sensitive vinyl records and delicate tone arms in the back of an unsprung half-track bounding over cratered, war-torn roads.
So the margin for error was non-existent. A single severe pothole could cause the heavy needle to skip forcefully across the record.
And if that happened, the German listening post 5 miles away wouldn't hear the steady rumble of a Maybach engine.
They would hear a massive rhythmic mechanical stutter.
And a skipped record wouldn't just ruin a song, it would instantly compromise the illusion, reveal the deception, and invite an immediate barrage of high-explosive artillery onto the half-track's coordinates.
The tension of operating a turntable under those conditions is unimaginable to me.
It's essentially DJing for your life.
Literally. Which transitions us to the third pillar of their operation, the domain of the signal company's special. This might be the most psychologically invasive tactic they deployed.
Spoof radio.
Spoof radio.
Yeah.
It's like a masterful audio deepfake or forging a signature, but doing it live on the airwaves.
If the visual and sonic pillars manipulated the enemy's forward observers, spoof radio was designed to directly hack the German High Command's intelligence network.
Right, because the foundational concept of spoof radio relies on understanding how radio telegraphy actually functions at the human level. Every Morse code operator, no matter how rigorously trained, possesses a highly specific, identifiable microrhythm when they tap out a transmission.
The spacing between their dashes, the slight hesitation before a specific letter, the weight of their hand on the key.
It all creates a biometric signature known in the military as their fist.
Right, it functions exactly like a fingerprint or an involuntary handwriting style.
And a highly trained German radio intercept operator on the receiving end doesn't just decode the message, they learn to intuitively recognize the exact American operator sending it.
Because by tracking the fist, they track the individual, and by tracking the individual, they track the movement of the specific division that individual is attached to.
Because the German intelligence apparatus relied heavily on radio traffic analysis. Even if they couldn't break the encryption, the sheer volume of traffic allowed them to map the American order of battle with terrifying accuracy.
And the Ghost Army understood this vulnerability perfectly.
They did. Their operators engaged in obsessive, intensive training to perfectly mimic the individual fists of the real operators attached to the actual combat units they were impersonating.
It is the 1940s analog equivalent of a highly sophisticated neural network generating an audio deepfake, but achieved entirely through muscle memory and human repetition.
Exactly. So when a genuine American armored division was ordered to secretly withdraw from the front line and pivot to a new sector for a surprise offensive, they would initiate absolute radio silence.
And the moment they went dark, the Ghost Army's spoof radio operators would seamlessly step into the void.
They would transmit fake, highly encrypted logistical traffic using the exact, identical fist of the departed operator.
So from the perspective of the German intercept station, nothing had changed.
Right. The volume of the traffic remained consistent, the encrypting protocols matched, and crucially, the human rhythm of the operator was identical.
They were entirely convinced that the massive armored division was still firmly entrenched directly across from them, blissfully unaware that the real division was currently driving 100 miles north to flank them.
It created a catastrophic false sense of security within the German command structure. But, and this is but all of these technical pillars, the rubber tanks, the massive amplifiers, the forged radio traffic, require a final, cohesive layer of human interaction to truly cement the reality.
The fourth and final pillar, atmosphere and acting.
Executed primarily by the 406th Combat Engineers, this was pure immersive theatricality designed to feed the enemy's human intelligence networks.
Right. The men of the Ghost Army would manufacture counterfeit unit patches and meticulously sew them onto their uniforms.
They would rapidly paint the specific, recognizable bumper insignias of the genuine armored divisions they were mimicking onto the bumpers of their few real transport vehicles.
They would boldly pin on the stars of high-ranking generals, drive convoys of jeeps into recently liberated French or Belgian towns, and deliberately inhabit the local cafes.
Knowing full well that German sympathizers and stay-behind spies were monitoring the civilian population.
Right. So these actors would order drinks and loudly, seemingly carelessly, complain to each other about the logistical nightmares of their massive impending troop movements.
They functioned as a highly mobile, deeply committed repertory theater company, and their sole audience was the intelligence apparatus of the Third Reich.
But dissecting these four pillars raises a glaring fundamental vulnerability that we have to address.
Right. And I have to ask you a pointed question here. The entire operation seems incredibly brittle.
Yeah.
Like, if I am a German stay-behind spy or even just a deeply skeptical local farmer walking my dog through the woods and I stumble upon this encampment,
Yeah.
if I walk up and just poke one of these imposing Sherman tanks and simply press my thumb against the armor, the whole illusion shatters instantly. It's canvas and compressed air. How do they prevent the illusion from failing up close?
Well, the protection against that specific physical vulnerability didn't rely on posting thousands of guards.
Okay, what did it rely on?
It relied on an advanced understanding of cognitive psychology, specifically the concepts of sensory overload and confirmation bias.
Ah, okay. How does that work in this context?
Well, the military planners weren't just building fake tanks, they were actively weaponizing the way the human brain processes environmental data.
Okay, so if I'm a German officer,
Right. If you are a German intelligence officer sitting in a command bunker, your entire professional mandate is to synthesize incoming data from disparate sources to form a cohesive tactical picture.
so I'm getting reports from everywhere.
Exactly. You receive a frantic report from a reconnaissance pilot who confirms, "I visually identified tanks in Sector 4.
Okay, Che.
Almost simultaneously, your forward acoustic listening post calls in to report, "We are tracking the heavy mechanical audio signature of armored columns moving into Sector 4.
Check.
Then, your radio intercept division hands you a stack of traffic analysis reports that prove, based on the operator's fist, that the headquarters of the 90th Infantry Division is actively transmitting from Sector 4.
Wow, okay, that's 3 points of contact.
And finally, your human intelligence network relays a coded message from a spy in a nearby village stating, "I just observed a general from the 90th Infantry Division in the local tavern complaining about the mud in Sector 4.
And the cognitive effect of that is just overwhelming. Every single independent vector of intelligence is perfectly aligning to confirm the exact same narrative.
Exactly. The Ghost Army actively engineered a perfectly enclosed, self-reinforcing ecosystem of confirmation bias.
So the German officer's brain is completely saturated with high-value data points that all forcefully point to one singular, inescapable conclusion.
That there is a massive, heavily armed American force massing in Sector 4.
And because their brain has already accepted the presence of the Army as an absolute verifiable fact based on overwhelming multisensory inputs, the critical faculties shut down.
Yes. They don't dispatch a scout to physically walk into the woods and poke the tank with a bayonet because they already know the tank is real.
The human brain naturally seeks narrative cohesion, and the Ghost Army provided a flawless narrative.
They didn't need to defeat the enemy's physical armor. They defeated their cognitive processing. They exploited the brain's innate vulnerability to multisensory corroboration.
It's a masterclass in cognitive manipulation. It remains highly relevant today,
Oh,
honestly.
absolutely.
But, it's a breathtakingly elegant theory. But reading through the unit histories, there is this stark, brutal contrast that kept pulling me back to reality.
The danger.
Yes, the danger. It is very easy to romanticize this story from the safety of the present day. We can view it as a brilliant, almost victimless prank, a bunch of clever bohemian artists pulling off the ultimate magic trick against the stodgy fascists.
Right, but this wasn't happening in an art gallery.
Exactly. This was happening on the bleeding edge of the front lines in the deadliest mechanized conflict in human history. The rubber tanks were fake, the records were illusion, but the bullets fired at them were very, very real.
And that intersection where the theoretical elegance of the deception collides with the kinetic brutality of the Second World War is where the true nature of this unit's sacrifice becomes apparent.
Let's transition to the danger and the reality of the stage they were occupying. The Ghost Army wasn't a one-off experiment that packed up and went home after a single success.
No, between their deployment in the summer of 1944 and the end of the war in 1945, from the hedgerows of Normandy all the way to the banks of the Rhine, they actively participated in more than 20 separate, large-scale deception operations.
They executed Operation Bedenberg, Operation Elephant, Operation Breast. 20 distinct times they had to methodically construct this highly fragile, combustible house of cards while a heavily armed, highly motivated enemy army was sitting right next door, actively searching for them.
And we must examine their specific tactical mandate here, because their primary mission objective wasn't to simply hide.
No, it wasn't. Their objective was to actively draw enemy fire away from the genuine American combat units.
Which is just, the implications of that mandate are staggering.
To be a successful decoy, your performance must be convincing enough that the enemy command structure decides to expend incredibly valuable ammunition to destroy you.
To keep the real American infantrymen safe as they maneuvered elsewhere, the men of the Ghost Army had to set up their illusions, sit perfectly still within them, and actively invite the fury of the German artillery.
They were ordered to orchestrate their own bombardment.
Yes.
Picture the terrifying reality of that scenario. You have spent the night inflating rubber Sherman tanks in a frozen field. Dawn breaks. The German forward observers spot your position, and the heavy artillery batteries open fire. Massive shells are tearing through the tree canopy, detonating and sending jagged shrapnel flying in every direction.
The concussions are deafening.
Your rubber tanks are taking direct hits and getting shredded. And what is your tactical response? You don't have a hardened steel tank to retreat into.
You don't have counter-battery artillery to return fire and silence the German guns.
No. Your specific mandated job is to hunker down in a muddy foxhole, wait for a momentary lull in the barrage, scramble out into the open under the threat of live fire, and desperately apply a canvas patch and rubber cement to the gaping holes in your deflating decoy so that it remains inflated and continues to attract the enemy's artillery fire.
It is an almost absurdly surreal image, a man fixing a balloon in a war zone, but the physical danger was absolute.
And the casualty reports violently strip away any remaining romanticism. This was not a bloodless intellectual exercise. 3 soldiers from the 23rd Headquarters Special Troops were killed in action, and dozens more suffered severe shrapnel wounds and combat injuries.
And here's where it gets really interesting.
Well, yeah. When we discuss the concept of heroism and bravery in the context of warfare, our cultural narrative almost universally defaults to kinetic action, right?
Right, the infantrymen charging a machine gun nest, weapon raised.
Overcoming the enemy through aggressive force of will and superior firepower. But the bravery demanded of the Ghost Army requires us to completely redefine courage. It is one thing to charge into battle with a real tank. It is entirely another to sit inside a rubber balloon, actively inviting the enemy to drop bombs on your head, knowing you cannot shoot back.
If we connect this to the bigger picture of combat psychology, we see a complete redefinition of courage. The men of the Ghost Army were forced to execute an unbelievable degree of psychological control.
Because of the fight-or-flight instinct.
Exactly. Every single innate evolutionary instinct encoded into the human nervous system, the most primal, deeply rooted survival mechanisms of the brain screams at an organism under attack to either flee immediately from the source of danger or to aggressively fight back against it.
The fight-or-flight response is involuntary, but the doctrine of the Ghost Army strictly forbade both.
Precisely. If they succumbed to the instinct to flee, the encampment would be abandoned, the visual illusion would quickly degrade, the Germans would realize they were bombarding a phantom, and they would immediately redirect their artillery fire onto the real American combat units, the very men the Ghost Army was tasked with protecting.
Those real units would be slaughtered.
Conversely, if the Ghost Army yielded to the instinct to fight back, if they picked up their light M1 Garand rifles and started taking pot shots at heavily armored German panzers, it would be tactically useless.
They would be instantly wiped out, the illusion would be broken, and the strategic deception would fail.
So their only weapon, their absolute only defense against the crushing anxiety of an artillery barrage was total, unwavering commitment to the performance. They had to aggressively suppress their own survival instincts and trust that the illusion would hold.
The psychological toll of that reality, of sitting in a shallow trench, listening to the whistle of incoming ordnance, knowing you cannot take a single kinetic action to alter your fate, is immense.
It is the absolute courage of restraint.
Yes. It is the bravery required to maintain the structural integrity of a lie, regardless of the physical cost to yourself. And having established the incredibly deadly stakes and the tools at their disposal, the deep dive shifts to the ultimate test of the Ghost Army's capabilities.
The climax of their European tour.
The masterpiece Operation Viersen,
March 1945.
which brings us full circle to the terrifying scenario we painted in the opening minutes of this deep dive. The strategic situation on the Western Front is hypercritical. The Allied advance has pushed the natural geographic barrier of the Rhine River.
And the U.S. Ninth Army, commanded by General William Simpson, needs to cross the Rhine to drive a dagger into the industrial heart of Germany.
And in the vast history of military tactics, an amphibious river crossing against a deeply entrenched, heavily fortified, and desperate enemy is universally recognized as one of the most deadly, chaotic, and vulnerable maneuvers an army can attempt.
Because while the troops are on the water, they are stripped of their mobility and heavy armor.
Completely exposed to the pre-sighted heavy guns waiting on the opposite bank.
Right. And the German defense doctrine dictates turning the river itself into a kill zone. The Allied planners were acutely aware that if the Ninth Army attempted a straightforward crossing and was caught mid-river by the full weight of the German defenses, the casualty numbers would be catastrophic.
Potentially stalling the entire advance. So to mitigate this impending bloodbath, the Ghost Army receives their most daunting deployment orders to date. They are ordered to stage Operation Viersen.
And the objective is massive.
Yeah, to construct a completely fabricated river crossing scenario about 10 miles away from where the real Ninth Army is actually preparing to cross.
And the scale is staggering. We are talking about an operational force of roughly 1,000 men impersonating 2 full divisions.
The 30th and the 79th Infantry Divisions. That equates to projecting the physical, acoustic, and electromagnetic footprint of over 30,000 heavily armed troops, utilizing only 1,000 men.
To pull this off, the Ghost Army emptied their entire arsenal. They pulled out every single technique they had refined over the previous grueling year of combat deployments.
The visual team frantically deployed their entire inventory of over 600 inflatables, meticulously arranging massive dummy motor pools across the frost-covered fields, complete with perfectly painted shadows and deliberately churned mud tracks.
And the sonic teams ran their 500-watt sound trucks around the clock in this highly orchestrated acoustic ballet. Throughout the freezing night, they blasted the heavy, ground-shaking rumble of armored columns moving into position.
And as dawn broke, they seamlessly transitioned the audio to project the chaotic, metallic clamor of heavy combat engineer battalions frantically assembling steel pontoon bridges.
The radio operators saturated the airwaves, perfectly mimicking the fists of the operators from the 30th and 79th Divisions,
generating a massive, encrypted storm of fake logistical traffic that screamed of an impending assault.
They established vast, entirely fake command headquarters, staffed by artists wearing the stars of colonels and generals, shuffling blank papers and barking meaningless orders for the benefit of any observing spies.
They even introduced a new, highly dangerous element to the visual deception: specialized artillery flash canisters.
Ah, yes. The deployment of those flash canisters highlights their absolute dedication to multisensory realism.
Exactly. To sell the illusion of a massive pre-invasion artillery bombardment, the engineers would ignite these highly volatile chemical canisters throughout the night.
which would produce sudden, blinding bursts of light that perfectly mimicked the distinct muzzle flashes of heavy 155mm artillery pieces firing in the dark.
So from the perspective of the German lines on the opposite bank, you didn't just hear the phantom battle. You saw the violent flashing reality of the guns preparing to tear your defenses apart.
They simulated the entire terrifying ecosystem of a massive combined arms assault.
I compare Operation Viersen to a magician's grand finale, using the ultimate sleight of hand, making the enemy look at the flashy left hand while the right hand delivers the knockout blow.
And the result, the Germans bought the illusion completely.
Without a single hesitation. They rapidly massed their defensive forces, their panzers, and their artillery, opposite the Ghost Army's fake crossing at Viersen. They actually opened fire, raining highly destructive artillery barrages down onto the rubber tanks in empty fields.
And meanwhile, 10 miles up the river, the real U.S. Ninth Army launched their amphibious assault and crossed the Rhine with shockingly minimal resistance.
The German forces that should have been there to contest the crossing were busy fighting a balloon army 10 miles away. It was a flawless execution of strategic deception.
The veterans of the unit and subsequent military historians universally consider Operation Viersen to be the Ghost Army's absolute masterpiece.
It's easy to see why.
Yeah. When you analyze the granular mechanics of the operation, it wasn't just the sheer scale of the deception.
Although inflating 600 vehicles in freezing weather is incredible.
Right, but the true triumph was the flawless, uncompromising synchronization of all four pillars of their toolkit. The visual decoys, the sonic projection, the spoof radio traffic, and the theatrical acting all had to align with microscopic precision.
If the forged radio traffic indicated that a specific tank battalion was moving down a specific road, the sonic teams had to ensure the audio of tanks moving originated from that exact geographic location.
And the camouflage teams had to ensure that rubber tanks were visible in that sector for the morning reconnaissance flights to photograph.
If even one element was slightly out of phase, if the audio played but no tanks were visible, the entire illusion would fracture. The Germans would realize it was a trap, and they would pivot to attack the real crossing.
But the artists held the illusion together perfectly. This raises an important question, though. How do you accurately and empirically measure the success of a battle that, by its very definition and design, never actually happened?
It is the ultimate historical counterfactual. You cannot photograph or interview the soldiers who didn't die. You can't pin medals on the ghost of a battle that was prevented.
But historians have rigorously analyzed the data. They have examined the German troop deployments, the density of the defenses opposite the real crossing versus the fake crossing, and the historical casualty rates of opposed river crossings.
And what did they find?
Based on those metrics, they estimate that the actions of this single, bizarre unit, these 1,100 painters, fashion designers, and sound engineers, directly saved the lives of somewhere between 15,000 and 30,000 Allied soldiers.
I frequently find myself just sitting with the gravity of that number. 15 to 30,000 lives. We are talking about 30,000 human beings who survived the war, who got to board a ship, go home, get married, raise families, and live out the entirety of their natural lives.
Entirely because a young man recruited from an art school possessed the skill to play a phonograph record really loud and the nerve to patch a rubber tank under artillery fire.
It is a profound, undeniable triumph of human ingenuity. And usually the heroes of a story like this come home to parades and movie deals.
That is the established trajectory of the American war hero.
Right. But for the Ghost Army, the end of the war was the beginning of an entirely different kind of mission, the 50-year silence.
Yes, the unit was quietly and unceremoniously deactivated in September of 1945.
The men are brought into a briefing room, and they are sworn to absolute, unbreakable secrecy. The government explicitly informs them that everything they did is now highly classified top-secret information.
And incredibly, they kept that secret for 50 years. The records remained completely classified until 1996.
So, what does this all mean? I want you to mentally put yourself in their shoes for just a moment. Try to genuinely imagine carrying the immense weight of a secret of that magnitude. You know you saved 30,000 lives, but you can never, ever mention it.
You can never brag about it.
Right. You can never explain to your spouse why you flinch at a loud noise or why a backfiring car causes severe combat stress when your official war record says you were just painting canvas behind the lines.
Many of these veterans went on to shape American art and culture, right? Bill Blass built a fashion empire. Ellsworth Kelly's art hung in prestigious museums. They lived highly scrutinized, intensely public lives.
And yet they never slipped. Some literally took the secret to their graves. They never even told their own families what they actually did during the war.
The profound discipline required to maintain this silence is staggering. But they weren't hiding out of shame. They were hiding out of a deep sense of duty.
Why did the government bury it so deeply?
Because the geopolitical landscape shifted instantly. The moment the Second World War ended, the Cold War began. The government knew these psychological tactics, sensory overload, acoustic targeting, spoof radio, might be desperately needed again against the Soviet Union.
So revealing them to the public would reveal them to Soviet intelligence.
Exactly. And the artists respected the work enough to keep the invisible ink hidden. It's a beautiful irony, really. An army that spent a year manufacturing noise that wasn't real, and spent half a century making no noise at all.
What stands out to you? Think about the selflessness required to let history overlook you so that the tactics that saved your brothers in arms remain secure. And because of that, recognition came painfully late.
The unit was awarded the Congressional Gold Medal in 2024.
By which point only a tiny, fragile handful of the original 1,100 members were still alive to accept the honor.
It's a profound sacrifice of ego.
It really is. So let's briefly recap this incredible journey for the listener. We've seen how 1,100 painters, architects, and sound engineers beat the Wehrmacht with rubber, vinyl records, and sheer nerve.
They saved tens of thousands of lives at Operation Viersen.
Only to fade completely into the background of history until the 21st century. But I want to leave you with a final lingering thought that builds on everything we've discussed today.
Let's hear it.
We've spent this deep dive looking backward at how a physical reality was faked in 1945 using rubber and record players. But look at the world you live in today. We exist in an era of deepfakes, AI-generated voices, and digital fabrication.
A very different landscape.
Exactly. If 1,100 artists could successfully conjure an entire phantom army in the physical world 80 years ago, what does that mean for our grasp on reality today? Could a modern ghost army exist entirely in the digital realm, fighting an information war that we don't even know is happening right now?
Something to deeply consider the next time you see something unbelievable on your feed.
Absolutely. Keep questioning the reality in front of you. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. We'll see you next time.